Empress Lira faces human defender, his act of mercy in the arena, shatters Xylen tradition. The diplomatic cruiser. Starward Promise trembled in the darkness of space, her hull torn open by searing ion blasts. Sirens wailed above the low animal groan of wounded metal, red strobes flickering through corridors warped by intermittent pulses of gravity. Acrid smoke curled from ruptured conduits. Crew members sprinted past, eyes wild, voices lost in the cacophony. Mark Ellison braced himself against a shuddering bulkhead, feeling the agony of the ship as if it were his own. Years of conflict had taught him to listen for the subtle cues, a certain pitch in the alarms, a texture to the deck's vibration that told him just how close death pressed. He wiped grit from his brow, moving with a calm that set him apart from the chaos. Lieutenant Commander Brooks stumbled into view, one hand pressed to a bloody gash above his right eyebrow, breath ragged. "Mark! They're cutting through the aft doors. Xylen marauders. At least 2 squads. We're minutes from a full breach in the ambassadorial wing." Mark's gaze flicked to the smoldering corridor behind Brooks. The faint tang of ozone already seeped through the vents. "Where's the ambassador?" "Still barricaded in the consular suite," Brooks replied, frustration and fear mingling in his voice. "He refuses to let us mount a defense. Says any resistance will doom the treaty." Mark's jaw clenched. "He wants us to die for peace." Brooks nodded. "Orders are orders, Mark. He insists we get to the shuttles, but—" Mark stepped forward, his tone brooking no argument. "You'll get him and the others to the escape pods. That's not a request." Brooks looked aghast. "I can't leave you here. My place is with my men." "This isn't about pride," Mark said, voice low but steady. "Someone has to buy time. You're better at keeping people together. Get them out. That's the mission now." Brooks hesitated, torn between loyalty and duty. Then, with a final nod, he turned away, barking orders to the nearby crew. Mark watched him go, feeling the weight of solitude settle onto his shoulders. A thrum of energy vibrated through the deck plates. Mark looked up. The forward hatch at the corridor's end was glowing white-hot, a plasma torch chewing methodically through the alloy. He holstered his sidearm knowing it would do little against Xylen armor, but the ritual mattered. With a shriek, the hatch buckled inward. Shadows spilled across the threshold. Xylen marauders, tall and sinewy, their cobalt skin gleaming beneath ornate plating. Their elongated skull crests caught the flickering emergency lights, casting monstrous silhouettes on the ruined walls. The lead Xylen strode forward, contempt curling his lip. "You stand alone, forsaken by your kin. This is why your kind will always submit." Mark took a measured step back, feigning uncertainty as he sized up the corridor's branching routes. Never been much for company. He squeezed off a shot, the round ricocheting harmlessly off Xylen armor. The nearest marauder sneered, but Mark was already moving, ducking into a side passage as heavy stun rounds sizzled past his head. He ran, navigating the labyrinthine halls by memory, turning corners at random intervals to break pursuit. Twice he doubled back, catching 2 Xylen off guard. His fists and elbows found soft gaps in their armor, but for every one he felled, 3 more closed in. He made it as far as the auxiliary life support bay before a sonic pulse hammered his senses, flattening him to the deck. His limbs convulsed, vision fracturing into white static. Energy bindings snapped around his wrists and ankles, cold and humming with restraint. Rough hands dragged him upright. The Xylen commander examined him with a curious sneer. "So, the Phantom of Vega outpost. We wondered if the tales were true." Mark tried to focus. "You've got me confused with someone luckier." The commander's reply was a silent glance to a waiting officer who produced a slender badge, the sigil of the Xylen matriarchy, its royal insignia unmistakable. This was no act of random piracy. They had come for him? He was hustled onto a skiff, the starfield spinning as the starward promise dwindled behind him. The Xylen flagship loomed ahead, an obsidian blade set into the void, marked with the same regal crest. They brought him to a cell with a wide viewport overlooking the heart of the citadel, an amphitheater carved from living rock, every surface etched with reliefs of conquest and submission. The air was cold, tinged with the mineral scent of asteroid dust. From his vantage, Mark watched the comings and goings of guards, noting the rhythm of their patrols, the way they spoke in clipped syllables, the subtle tells of fatigue and boredom. For 3 days, he ate, drank, and waited. He memorized the routes, the shifts, the keys. No detail was too small. He counted the breaths between footsteps, the seconds between door cycles, the way the cell's force field stuttered during the ship's daily energy realignment. On the 3rd day, the outer doors parted with a hiss. A pair of guards stood to rigid attention as a figure swept into the chamber. She was taller than most Xylen, her gown a cascade of iridescent filaments that shimmered with every movement. Her skin caught the faint light, shifting from cobalt to pearl. Eyes like polished obsidian studied him with unblinking intensity. "Empress Lira," one guard announced, bowing low. Lira dismissed them with a flick of her hand, stepping closer. "So, the Phantom of Vega outpost, reduced to a cage." Mark met her gaze, forcing his voice to remain steady. "There are worse places to spend a vacation." A faint smile touched her lips. "Most would beg. Or rage. You do neither." "I'm afraid I don't see the point," Mark replied. "You already hold all the cards." She circled him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Tell me, are you afraid?" He hesitated. "Yes. I'd be a fool not to be." "Good." Her tone was unreadable. "Fear is honest. Your ambassador, he hides behind words. You do not." Mark shrugged. "Words are easier to break than people." Lyra considered him for a long moment. "Soon, you will face the right of supremacy. You know what that is?" "I've heard the stories," he said quietly. "Gladiatorial combat. Trial by death." "It is tradition," she said, and for an instant something softer flickered in her gaze. "But traditions can change, if the right question is answered." She turned to leave. "Rest, Mark Ellison. Tomorrow, you will show us who you truly are." That night, a different face appeared at the cell door. The Xylen officer wore plainer armor, her hair braided tight around a delicate crest. She placed a tray on the shelf, eyeing Mark with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "My name is Sira," she said. "Last meal, before the rite." Mark sat on the bunk, hunger gnawing at his nerves. "Am I supposed to thank you?" Sira shook her head. "Most plead, some curse. You watch." "Why?" He took a slow bite, chewing carefully. "Because sometimes waiting tells you more than fighting ever could." Sira studied him, brow furrowing. "You risked your life for your crew. Why not save yourself?" He set the tray aside. "Sometimes, the only thing you can control is who you stand for." She nodded, almost to herself. "There are legends, among my people, of gentle victors, those who win not by force but by empathy. I never believed them." Mark managed a faint smile. "Maybe that's what your Empress is looking for. Not a warrior, an answer." Sira lingered a moment longer, watching him as if trying to see something hidden. Then, without a word, she left, the cell door sealing behind her. Mark sat in silence, the amphitheater looming beyond the glass, ancient and unyielding. Tomorrow, the test would begin, not just of strength, but of something deeper and older, written in the scars of conquerors and the hopes of the conquered alike. As dawn neared, Lyra visited again, her regal composure now tinged with fatigue, and an uncertainty she could no longer hide. Mark, seated cross-legged on his bunk, looked up as the cell door sighed open. The Empress stood silhouetted in the faint silver of asteroid morning, her iridescent gown muted, eyes shadowed by something deeper than exhaustion. She dismissed the guards with a subtle gesture. They melted away, leaving the chamber heavy with silence and expectation. Lira moved closer, her steps deliberate but lacking the previous night's certainty. "Couldn't sleep either?" Mark offered quietly. She regarded him, her lips tightening. "Sleep is for those without burdens, or without doubts." He nodded, glancing out at the empty amphitheater beyond the glass. "You look different in the morning, Empress." A faint smile ghosted across her face, quickly gone. "Titles are armor, Mark Ellison. We wear them to hide our wounds. I imagine you know something of that." He shrugged. "Armor's only as strong as what it protects." Lira hesitated, the words almost catching in her throat. "My people's obsession with dominance. It's not pride alone. It is fear. Long ago, before my line ascended, the Xylen ruled with absolute power. But we were undone, not by greater force, but by an adversary who offered mercy. We expected annihilation. Instead, they spared us. That kindness shattered us more deeply than any weapon could." Mark watched her closely, surprised by her candor. "Mercy as a weapon. That's a hell of a legacy." She glanced away, gaze distant. "Since then, we've taught every generation to harden themselves, to believe compassion is a weakness. And yet, our oldest prophecies say, those who best us will do so by refusing to wield force when it is theirs to command. Gentle victors, we call them. It is a riddle that has haunted us for centuries." He drew in a breath. "So now you're wondering if that's what humanity is." "If I am?" Lyra's voice softened, almost pleading. "I don't know. You confuse me. You act out of fear and hope. Two things we are taught to master. Never to serve. You risked everything to save your crew, even knowing it might mean your death." Mark rested his hands in his lap. "Fear keeps you alive. Hope keeps you human. Sometimes you have to be both." For a moment, Lira seemed very far from her throne, a woman caught between the traditions that shaped her and the possibility of something new. "Today's trial will decide more than your fate, Mark Ellison. It will decide if the future belongs to conquerors or to something we have forgotten." He studied her, then nodded. "Whatever happens, I'll do what I can to answer your riddle." She stood silent, her expression unreadable. At last, she left, her footsteps echoing in the corridor as the cell door closed behind her. The amphitheater seethed with anticipation. Thousands of Xylen citizens filled the tiered stands, their cobalt skin and crested skulls a sea of silent scrutiny. Overhead, banners of the matriarchy unfurled, catching the pale artificial light. The carved walls shimmered with hollow projections of ancient battles, each one a reminder of the traditions at stake. Mark marched forward, clad in ceremonial armor that felt both foreign and oppressively heavy. Polished to a mirror sheen, it fit awkwardly against his human frame, as if daring him to pretend he belonged here. At his side, an attendant handed him a blunt-edged dueling sword, its weight cold and unfamiliar. The crowd's collective breath seemed to hold as Lira entered from the opposite gate. She was radiant in her regalia, her gown a living prism, her face set in the mask of a ruler, but her eyes sought Mark's, searching for something only he could give. In her hands, she carried the ritual staff, its crystalline tip glowing with inner fire. A hush descended as the High Oracle, draped in ceremonial gold and indigo, raised a staff and spoke in a language older than the amphitheater itself. The words washed over Mark, but he caught the meaning. This was a trial not merely of combat but of spirit. Lira advanced, her staff spinning in a blur. Mark raised his blade, bracing himself as she struck. Fast, precise. A dancer's grace turned lethal. The staff rang against his sword, sending vibrations up his arm. He staggered back, adjusting to her rhythm, blocking a second flurry of blows with narrow margins. She pressed him, voice low, meant for his ears alone. "Why do you hold back?" He grunted, parrying another strike. "Maybe I'm just buying time." She spun, her staff sweeping low. Mark leaped aside, rolling to his feet. "You could end this," she whispered, her tone laced with challenge. "Or are you afraid of what winning means?" He feinted, darted left, and then, seizing a rare opening, swung the flat of his blade into her side. Lira gasped, stunned, her footing faltering. The crowd erupted in surprise. A human, striking the Empress. Mark stepped back, lowering his guard. "I don't want to hurt you." Lyra's eyes widened, a storm of calculation and curiosity within. "Is restraint your weapon?" The duel became a dialogue, their words as sharp as their blows. She circled, probing, testing not just his defenses but the convictions behind them. "The legends say we will be bested by one who refuses to dominate. Do you believe that?" Mark dodged a thrust, his breath ragged. "I think you're tired of blood. Maybe your people are too." Lira lunged, her staff aimed at his exposed flank. He blocked, but instead of countering, simply held her gaze. "Why do you seek an answer from me?" She disengaged, chest heaving. "Because you fight differently. You fear, but you do not hate. You protect, but do not conquer." He shook his head. "I fight because I have to, but I live for what comes after." Blow after blow, the battle wove on, Mark's unpredictability balancing Lyra's speed. She landed a glancing strike across his helmet, knocking him off balance, but he refused to answer with lethal force. Each time he had an advantage, he hesitated, using his skill to deflect rather than harm. The amphitheater grew eerily quiet, the crowd transfixed not by violence, but by the absence of it. Even the guards leaned forward, breathless. At last, the High Oracle's voice thundered through the amphitheater, reciting the prophecy. "When the gentle victors rise, they will be known not by their might, but by their refusal to wield it. They shall best the greatest warriors, not through force, but by choosing mercy when victory is at hand." Lyra's eyes searched Mark's face, pleading, testing, and finally, resigned. She lowered her staff, exposing her throat and heart, the universal gesture of vulnerability. Mark stood over her, sword poised. The crowd waited, hungry for the final blow. But he shook his head, letting the blade fall harmlessly to the sand. "I yield," he said, voice ringing across the stone. "I refuse to win by force." A gasp rippled through the arena. Lyra stared up at him, astonishment plain on her face. She had seen strength, skill, and defiance, but never this. For a moment, the amphitheater hung suspended between worlds, the old and the new, the conqueror and the gentle victor. Everything had changed. Mark found himself lying on a low couch in Lyra's private quarters, his battered body nestled in a room suffused with the soft gold of Xylen healing lamps. The chamber, carved from gleaming onyx, pulsed with subdued light and the faint music of water trickling from a sculpted fountain. Xylen medics hovered over him, their hands deft and cool, applying salves to bruises and closing cuts with beams of pale energy. He winced as a healer pressed a crystal patch to his ribs. Lira stood at the window, draped in a robe that shimmered like liquid crystal, reflecting the faint starlight beyond the citadel. Gone was the untouchable Empress who had dominated the amphitheater. She paced, restless, her fingers twisting the hem of her robe. Mark watched her from the couch, taking in her vulnerability, her poise fractured, her certainty shaken. When the medics departed, she turned to him. "You have disrupted everything, Mark Ellison. The priesthood is in uproar. The generals demand your exile or your execution. They say our traditions have been defiled, and her voice faltered, a rare crack in her regal composure. I find myself doubting the meaning of power for the first time in my life. Mark sat up slowly, careful not to strain his healing side. If it helps, you're not alone. Most people spend their lives trying to figure out what power even is. She moved closer, lowering herself onto the edge of the couch. The air between them hummed with words left unsaid, with longing neither of them quite dared acknowledge. She searched his face, her eyes luminous in the dim light. "Mercy," she said quietly. "Why show it? Why yield when victory is within your grasp?" He studied her, choosing his words. "Mercy isn't weakness, Lira. It's the hardest choice, especially when you have the advantage. It's saying, I could destroy, but I choose not to. That's real strength." She frowned as if tasting the idea for the first time. "My people only understand dominance or surrender. Our history is written in conquest and loss. We do not spare. We do not yield." Mark lifted his hand, palm up, a web of scars tracing his knuckles and wrist. "Every scar I've got comes from choosing not to give up, or from helping someone else get up instead of finishing them off. Humans, we carry our pain forward. We teach our children that it's possible to change, but we're far from perfect. Don't idealize us. We make mistakes, terrible ones." Lyra reached out tentatively, her touch unexpectedly gentle as she traced the old wound across the back of his hand. The contact sent a jolt through Mark, heat rising between them. "You live with your wounds. We erase ours, hide them as if they never happened. Perhaps that is why we forget so easily." He chuckled softly. "I've found that remembering is what keeps you honest. Every scar's a story, a reminder that you survived, and that you didn't have to survive alone." She tilted her head, regarding him with new fascination. "Is that why you fought for your crew? Even knowing it could mean your death?" He nodded. "They're my responsibility. It's not about rules or orders. It's about the people who count on you, and what you're willing to risk for them." A heavy silence settled between them, thick with longing and questions. Lyra's hand lingered on his, her fingers cool but trembling with energy. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he replied, voice rough. "It's the hardest thing in the world, but it's worth it." She drew closer, her breath mingling with his. Their faces hovered just apart, the line between them blurring. Mark could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a ruler unused to the vulnerability she now felt. Her lips parted in a silent question, her gaze flicking to his mouth. He closed the gap, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was brief, electric, and full of promise. Lyra inhaled sharply, startled by the sensation, her hand clutching his. For a heartbeat, neither moved, suspended between the worlds they represented. Then a chime sounded at the door, urgent, insistent. Lyra pulled away, breathless, her composure wavering. The moment shattered, but its imprint lingered on both of them. A Xylen officer strode in, his armor adorned with crimson and black, Commander Tharek, eyes blazing. He knelt, but his tone was anything but deferential. "Empress, the High Council demands explanation. The priesthood claims the rite has been profaned. The military will not stand for this heresy, this defilement of tradition." Lyra rose, back straight, a flicker of her old authority returning. "Mark Ellison fought with honor and restraint. He has shown us a path beyond endless bloodshed. You will tell the council that I stand by his actions and by my choice." Tharek stiffened, his jaw set. "The council will not accept this, nor will the generals. You risk civil fracture." She fixed him with a gaze of steel. Then let them come to me. I will answer for my decisions. Leave us. Tharik bowed, anger and confusion warring on his face, and withdrew. When the door closed, Lira sagged, tension radiating from her in waves. Mark reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. You didn't have to defend me, he murmured. She looked at him, something unspoken flickering in her eyes. If I don't stand for this, I stand for nothing. He smiled, squeezing her hand. That's the start of something. Not the end. Their connection deepened, the danger of the outside world making the private space between them feel all the more precious. The tension that had fractured before now found its release. A second kiss, deeper and more urgent, soft at first, then fierce with the promise of all they might become. Lira clung to him, her robe falling open at the collar, her heart beating against his. She broke away, breathless. You may be the hope my people have awaited for centuries, or the greatest threat we have ever faced. Her voice trembled with awe and fear. But I choose to embrace the risk. Mark drew her close, his lips meeting hers again, sealing the promise between them with all the reckless courage that hope demanded. Their connection deepened, not in spite of the peril surrounding them, but because of it. Two souls entwined at the edge of transformation, daring to rewrite the meaning of power and mercy together. Night fell on the asteroid citadel, draping its carved towers and shadowed halls in a hush that seemed to thicken the air itself. The usual rhythms of the palace slowed to a near halt. Even the guards' footfalls softened, subdued by the uncertainty that gripped the matriarchy. In the heart of the fortress, Lira moved through a winding corridor of obsidian, Mark following quietly at her side. She led him past doorways guarded by silent sentinels, into the deepest sanctum of her domain, a chamber reserved for a sovereign solitude, yet transformed now by the vulnerability that lingered between them. The walls here glimmered with veins of crystal, refracting starlight into intricate patterns that danced across the silken floor. A low fire burned in a sculpted hearth, its warmth a gentle contrast to the chill beyond the glass. At the center, a wide bed layered in iridescent cloth invited comfort rather than command. Lira paused, drawing the robe tighter around her shoulders, her confidence faltering for the first time in his presence. No one enters this place, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Not without invitation. Mark studied her in the shifting light. Then I'm honored. She turned, looking up at him with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. You may find it strange, but I have shared this space with others, never by choice. Always for alliance, for strength, for surrender to tradition. Never for gentleness. Never for love. Mark's gaze softened. What do you want now, Lira? She hesitated, searching his face for answers she could not name. I don't know how to be gentle. I do not know how to love as you do. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the confession as dangerous as any weapon she had ever wielded. Show me. Please. He stepped closer, careful to keep his movements slow, his intent plain. The fierce warrior before him had become almost fragile, her formidable power folded inward. Mark lifted a hand, brushing a strand of luminous hair from her brow. I'll show you, but only if you want me to. She nodded, breath catching. I want to learn. I want to feel what you feel. Their first touch was tentative, Mark's hand settling lightly on her cheek. She leaned into it, eyes fluttering closed, surrendering to an intimacy far more daunting than battle. Mark kissed her gently, lips lingering, allowing her to set the pace. He caressed the curve of her jaw, then her shoulder, the robe slipping from her skin like water. Lyra's hands moved to his chest, fingers trembling, not with fear, but with wonder. She marveled at the warmth of him, the scars beneath her touch, the fragile beat of his heart. "You trust me?" she whispered. He smiled, drawing her closer. "With everything I have." Their union unfolded slowly, a dance of tentative explorations and careful discoveries. Mark remained attuned to her every reaction, each shiver, each sigh, guiding her gently, always asking permission with his hands and eyes. For Lira, it was a revelation. The first time her strength was met not with resistance or submission, but with equal vulnerability. The first time closeness was not a contest, but a choice. She gasped softly as his lips traced the hollow of her throat, her own hands finding their courage, learning the language of affection. In his arms, she felt herself unravel and reform, no longer empress and captive, but two souls meeting in a space beyond power. Every moment was a question. May I? Will you? And every answer was yes. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the shifting light, their bodies pressed together in an intimacy that neither had known. Lyra's fingers traced idle patterns on Mark's chest, following the lines of old wounds and new promises. Her mind, however, could not be stilled. She propped herself up on one elbow, her silver hair cascading down to brush his shoulder. "I should feel triumphant," she confessed. "But I am only afraid. The council will demand a sacrifice. My generals will call for blood. If I fulfill the prophecy and choose mercy, I may lose everything. My throne, my people's trust. And if I give you up, I betray myself." Mark met her gaze, his hand resting atop hers. "You don't have to choose their way. You can give them something new, a path that protects instead of conquers." She shook her head, anguish clear in her voice. "You make it sound simple, but change is never welcomed. My people know only victory or defeat. There is no place in their stories for hope." He stroked her cheek, gentle and steady. "That's why you have to write a new story. Someone always has to be first. Someone has to risk everything to build something better." Lyra's eyes shimmered, the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. "I want to choose you, Mark. More than I have ever wanted anything, but that choice could destroy everything I've built. All the order, all the security." He smiled softly, tracing a line down her arm. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to build something new." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle between them. For a time, neither spoke. Outside, the citadel remained cloaked in silence, its future unwritten. Lyra finally spoke, her voice resolute. "When the sun rises, I will face them. I will not hide behind old laws or the fear of losing power. I will choose mercy, even if it means losing my throne. You have shown me there is more to lead for than fear." Mark pulled her close, feeling her trembling resolve turn to strength beneath his embrace. "Whatever comes, you won't face it alone." They lay together as the night deepened, their bodies and hearts entwined. In the uncertain dark, their love became both a beacon and a threat, a promise of hope in a world ruled by dominance, and a dangerous invitation to change. As dawn edged along the horizon, Lyra pressed a final lingering kiss to Mark's lips. "Whatever happens, I am grateful for this night." He drew her closer, his answer a quiet vow. "So am I." Together they awaited the coming light, knowing that it would bring either hope or ruin, but willing now to risk it all for a different future. At sunrise, the amphitheater throbbed with the collective pulse of thousands of Xylen. The tiers overflowed with citizens, warriors in ceremonial armor, clan elders draped in iridescent robes, acolytes of the priesthood clutching relics of conquest. The air shimmered with tension, every movement on the sands below watched by 100 unblinking eyes. One spark could ignite civil war. Commander Tharek strode to the center of the arena, his crimson and black armor reflecting the dawn. He stood tall, voice slicing through the murmurs. Empress Lira stands accused of betrayal. She has forsaken the right, shamed her blood, and let herself be tainted by this human, by weakness. His blade hissed from its sheath, the point aimed at the dais where Lira stood, flanked by Mark. The uproar was immediate. Shouts, jeers, fists raised in challenge. Lyra's face was serene, but her hands were steady as steel at her sides. Mark watched her profile, seeing not just a ruler, but a woman who had chosen to stand at the edge of everything she knew. Lira stepped forward, her voice ringing clear above the din. "Hear me, children of Xylen. For generations, we have worshipped strength. We have conquered, subdued, and built our empire on the bones of those who could not stand against us. But I ask you now, what has endless conquest brought us? Glory, yes. Fear, but also emptiness, suspicion, and a history that repeats itself in blood." The crowd quieted, many exchanging uncertain glances. Mark caught the flicker of doubt in more than one set of alien eyes. She continued, her gaze sweeping over the arena. "We remember the legends of the gentle victors, those who won by refusing to destroy. Our own defeat, ages ago, came not from annihilation, but from mercy. That is the prophecy that haunts us, and the lesson we have never truly faced." Therek's voice was thunder, raw with anger. "You would have us forget who we are? Throw down our swords and beg for scraps? Your words shame our ancestors." Lyra's eyes flashed. "No. I ask you to remember their wisdom, not just their victories. To honor strength, but use it to protect, to unite, not to dominate for its own sake. What is a ruler who cannot choose mercy? What is a people who cannot grow?" Therek advanced, weapon high. "Your mercy is poison. The council demands blood. Prove your loyalty to Xylen or abdicate." Mark felt the heat of 1,000 gazes converge on him. He moved to Lyra's side, his voice steady, amplified by the comm system. "You demand loyalty, Commander, but what do you offer in return? More war, more loss, more fear?" True courage isn't clinging to the old ways. It's forging a new path, even when you're afraid. I am human, and I am afraid. But I stand with Lira, and with any of you willing to admit that fear and hope can walk together. A hush rippled through the stands. A young warrior in the front row rose to her feet, her voice trembling. "If we follow you, Empress, who will protect us when our enemies return? What if mercy leads only to our destruction?" Lira met her gaze, her tone gentle but resolute. "Do you remember the story of our first defeat? The conquerors who spared us? That mercy did not destroy us. It gave us time to rebuild, to become stronger. If we choose only domination, we will always be surrounded by enemies. If we choose to protect as well as conquer, perhaps we gain allies and peace." Tharek raised his weapon, the threat unmistakable. "Enough. This is heresy. You and the human both must answer for it." Mark stepped forward, his posture open, hands spread in peace. "Or you could listen. For the first time in centuries, your empire stands at a crossroads. Lira is not asking you to become weak. She is asking you to become more than conquerors, more than what you fear." The tension grew unbearable, the crowd teetering between outrage and curiosity. For a long moment Therek stood rigid, weapon ready, eyes locked on Lira and Mark. The amphitheater was so silent, Mark could hear the breath of the person beside him. Finally, with agonizing deliberation, Therek lowered his blade. "Speak then. Let all hear what you would have us become." The crowd gasped, the first crack in the Empire's armor echoing across the ancient stones. Elders leaned forward, Priests exchanged uneasy glances, and the youngest warriors stared with wide, questioning eyes. Lira drew herself up, radiating dignity and hope. We will not abandon strength, we will not become prey, but we will choose what to do with our power. We will protect the vulnerable, Xylen and non-Xylen alike. We will forge alliances based on respect, not fear. We will explore, not just to conquer, but to learn. Let our strength be the foundation for unity and discovery, not endless war. The amphitheater erupted in debate, some shouting in outrage, others in cautious approval. The sound was wild, uncontainable, and yet beneath it Mark heard something new. Possibility. In the days that followed, Lira and Mark began a relentless campaign of dialogue. They met with clan leaders in chambers carved from crystal, their words echoing down corridors of power. Priests, once dismissive, listened with folded arms as Lira invoked the legends and prophecies they had guarded for generations. Fleet captains, their uniforms crisp and proud, came with questions, some hostile, some hopeful. If we turn from conquest, what becomes of our fleets, our warriors? They demanded. Mark answered calmly, You remain strong, but now your strength shields those who need it. You become protectors, not just conquerors. You seek knowledge, not just spoils. Some scoffed, others nodded thoughtfully. The resistance was fierce. Many could not imagine a Xylen future without the thrill of battle. But others, especially the young, saw the chance for something new. Lira addressed the priesthood in the Temple of Triumph, her voice echoing off murals of ancient war. You have always told our people to honor the prophecy of the gentle victors. Now, I ask you to help us fulfill it, not by surrendering who we are, but by becoming who we could be. Priests debated deep into the night, old fears warring with hope. Mark stood by Lyra's side through every negotiation, his presence a reminder that the impossible could be achieved. Even in the Council of the Generals, where suspicion was sharpest, Lira held her ground. Our strength is not diminished by choosing compassion. It is magnified, because it is chosen, not compelled. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Conversations that started with accusation ended in reluctant agreement. Clan leaders brought proposals for alliances with former enemies. Young warriors spoke of exploration, of charting the unclaimed stars. The transformation was not instant, nor was it complete. Resistance simmered, doubts persisted. But hope, for the first time in generations, had a place among the Xylen. The meaning of strength itself began to shift, not as a weapon, but as a promise. And so, in the wake of that fateful dawn, Lira and Mark continued their campaign. Not only for the future of the matriarchy, but for the soul of an empire learning to reconsider what it truly meant to be strong. Months passed. The asteroid citadel, once a bastion of conquest, its halls echoing with orders and the measured tread of soldiers, transformed before the eyes of its people. The clangor of weapon forges was replaced by the hum of fabrication lines turning out medical drones and planetary relief modules. Shipyards that had once birthed dreadnoughts now launched sleek cruisers emblazoned with the sigil of the Xylen matriarchy entwined with the emblem of Earth's confederation. Where once aspiring officers drilled for war, now they gathered in sunlit academies, debating the art of peace as fiercely as they had once sparred over tactics. In the heart of this renewal, Mark and Lira stood side by side on the observation deck. The transparent hull arched overhead, revealing a tapestry of stars and the glimmer of distant planets, no longer targets, but destinations for outreach and alliance. Their hands were entwined, fingers interlaced in silent affirmation. Below, the city buzzed with new life, a marketplace where Xylen artisans bartered with human traders, young recruits studying the laws of interstellar diplomacy, children of both worlds racing through the gardens that now filled the once sterile plazas. Lira leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the vastness beyond the glass. Her iridescent gown caught the light, refracting it in soft rainbows across Mark's chest. "Sometimes I scarcely recognize this place," she murmured. "A year ago, I dreamed only of conquest. Now every day brings a new kind of challenge and a new kind of hope." Mark smiled, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. "You made it possible. You risked everything." She shook her head, the motion gentle but firm. "We did this together. The council, the clans, even the priesthood. They listened because you stood with me. You showed us that strength isn't diminished by compassion. That mercy isn't surrender." He turned toward her, studying the lines that had softened around her eyes, the strength that still radiated from her, but was no longer edged with isolation. "I didn't know what would happen," he admitted quietly. "Some nights I lay awake, wondering if we were risking too much, if I'd brought more danger than hope." She squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "Hope is always a risk, but you taught me that it's worth everything." The rebuilt Starward Promise gleamed in the dock below them, its hull polished to a mirror shine. Where the old wounds from ion fire had scarred her, new panels gleamed, and along her flanks ran a bold new insignia: 2 hands, 1 human, 1 Xylen, clasped in unity. Workers from both species moved along her spine, overseeing the final touches. Lyra's smile grew wistful as she gazed at the ship. "The Starward Promise will sail again. Not as a diplomatic target, but as a symbol. A promise, in truth. You will command her, Mark. As captain, as emissary, as a bridge between our worlds. You'll carry our hope to every corner of the galaxy." Mark's breath caught. He had not expected her to make it public, not before the eyes of the dock crews, not with such trust and ceremony. "You're sure they'll accept me?" She laughed softly, the sound ringing with something lighter than he had ever heard in her before. "There will always be those who resist, but you are the living proof of what's possible. You, a human, stood in the heart of our empire, and instead of being broken, you changed us. The legend of the gentle victor has become our future." He looked down, a flush of humility coloring his cheeks. "I couldn't have done it alone. There were moments I wanted to run, to hide. But you—" He broke off, searching her face. "You never let me forget what was at stake, or what we could become." She touched his cheek, her hand cool and sure. "Nor you, me." The months had not been without struggle. There had been sabotage in the shipyards, heated debates in the great halls, and more than one night when Lyra's guards had to stand between her and would-be assassins. Yet, each crisis only seemed to deepen the resolve of those who believed in the new path. Academies sent forth a new generation of diplomats and mediators. Factories that once built engines of war now produced relief supplies, modular habitats, and medical ships. The Xylen began to visit worlds they once menaced, offering aid and forging partnerships. Children learned not just the stories of conquest, but the legends of the gentle victors and the names of those who had chosen mercy over destruction. On the observation deck, Mark and Lira watched these changes unfold. Their romance, once a dangerous anomaly, had become a beacon. At first, it was the stuff of scandalous rumor, an empress and her former adversary. Now it was a symbol, woven into ballads and speeches, inspiring even the most skeptical to imagine a future in which power could be balanced by compassion. Mark exhaled slowly, letting the magnitude of it all settle in. "Do you ever think about the beginning? About that first night? When you brought me here in chains?" She chuckled, the memory softening her features. "I remember how you looked at me, as if I were both your captor and your last hope. You were, he said simply, and you still are. Lyra's eyes glistened with unshed emotion. I used to fear that love was weakness, that it would unravel everything I'd built. Now I see, love is the only thing strong enough to change the world. They fell silent, gazing out at the swirling stars. Ships slipped past, bearing relief missions to scarred colonies, science teams to unexplored systems. Across the city, a choir of human and Xylen voices rose in song, the words blending in a language neither wholly one nor the other. Lira leaned into Mark, her head resting on his shoulder. There will be setbacks. Some will cling to the old ways, to their anger and their pain. There will always be war somewhere in the galaxy. He nodded, pressing a kiss to her hair. But there will also be peace. And for the first time, your people are choosing hope, not fear. That's what matters. She drew back, searching his face with a seriousness that belied the moment's calm. You're ready for this, Mark? To stand at my side, not just in love, but as a leader for both our peoples? He squeezed her hand. I'm ready. I believe in what we're building, and I believe in you. Together, they watched as the first rays of artificial dawn crept across the citadel, illuminating the city and the ships, symbols of all that had changed and all that still could. For the first time in generations, the Xylen looked forward not with fear, but with hope. Mark knew, as he stood with Lira, that even in the heart of the fiercest conqueror, mercy could take root. And that love, chosen freely and fiercely, could reshape the fate of empires. Hand in hand, they faced the future together, the stars above them, and the promise of a new beginning shining in their wake. That's the end of the story. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.